Cluth ish kual. Tlayahuat sish sua, good morning. It's good to see you. Uklasish matana, Monica Shore. My name is Matana, Monica Shore. And on behalf of the Society for Conservation Biology and the Isak Olam Foundation, co-hosts of NACCB 2024, I'd like to welcome you to this morning's plenary. Kleko. The Isak Olam Foundation, of which I am co-founder and executive director, is an Indigenous-led educational nonprofit. Our purpose is to mobilize knowledge and build capacity for Indigenous-led conservation. Many of our staff live on Vancouver Island, which you can pretty much see from here on a clear day, in Nuu-chah-nulth and Coast Salish territories. And we also have staff across Canada, in North America, and internationally. In my greetings to you, I spoke some words in the Tlaoquiit dialect of the Nuu-chah-nulth language. Although I am of Jewish European descent, I am married into Tlaoquiit. And language and culture, as you'll hear today, are at the heart and soul of Indigenous-led conservation. As such, as an Indigenous-led organization, our staff are engaged in language classes. It is an honor to share the stage with Terry Dorward, Don Morrison, and Eli Enns. These are three visionaries, leaders, problem solvers, and system thinkers whose work in Indigenous-led conservation is not a day job. They bring heart, past and future ancestors, and life purpose to everything they do. They are my colleagues, my teachers, and my friends. Broadly speaking, we'll be talking about Indigenous-led conservation. More specifically, we'll be highlighting worldviews of interconnectedness between the systems that humans rely upon, from culture and family ties to food and economies of abundance. Research shows that more than 80% of biodiversity worldwide lies in places that are stewarded by Indigenous peoples. Why is this so? What's different about the approaches and perspectives on conservation, a word that, by the way, doesn't translate to most Indigenous languages? And what can Western or conventional conservation practitioners and researchers and scientists learn from Indigenous peoples to help address the biodiversity, climate, and political crises we face? And why do language and culture matter so much? We'll be discussing these questions and more with our panelists, and I encourage you to consider your own questions, which we hope to have time for here today, though 90 minutes, as you'll see, will feel tight. And so we've created a special space called the Isak Olam Friendship Lounge, which many of you have come to see us at. And we welcome you to come and visit with us this afternoon and tomorrow to continue what we'll start today through a Q&A. I'm now going to introduce our wonderful panelists. Terry Dorward, Sicha, is Tlaoquiit First Nations from the House of Hayuwe, which is represented by the Seacher family. His brother, Ray Seacher, is the Taihatweth, head hereditary chief of Tlaoquiit. Terry holds the Nuu-chah-nulth name Sicha, which means one who swims around in the water. At the age of 12, Terry joined the 1984 marches and blockades that launched the Tlaoquiit Tribal Parks movement with the declaration of the Mears Island Tribal Park, Wanajas Hilthwis. It was this profound experience that provided Terry with an awareness of the struggles to uphold and protect Indigenous rights and title. Here's a visual of Tlaoquiit territory, or some of it. Terry has been an active member of various Indigenous direct action groups, supporting the removal of open net fish farms and defending Indigenous fishing rights. He has been educated and immersed in traditional and Western post-secondary education systems, which provide him with two-eyed-seeing perspective. Through Tlaoquiit Tribal Parks, Terry has delivered cultural, educational, stewardship, and economic programs. He was also one of the co-founders of the Tlaoquiit Guardian program that continues to monitor and enforce Tlaoquiit traditional laws within the region. Tlaoquiit Tribal Parks continues to be upheld nationally and internationally as a successful model of an Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area, or IPCA. Today, Sicha works with the Isako Lam Foundation, serving as president and director of West Coast IPCA Conservation. Welcome, Sicha.
Thank you.
I'll continue to introduce all of our panelists, and then we'll get into the dialogue. Don Morrison. Don Morrison is of Secwepemc ancestry and is the founder and curator of research and relationships for the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty. Don has a formal Western education in horticulture, ethnobotany, adult education, and restoration of natural systems. This is balanced with her personal healing and learning journey with Secwepemc elders and Indigenous knowledge holders. Following the time she spent teaching Aboriginal adult basic education, Dawn has been dedicating her time and energy to land-based healing and learning, which led her to her life's work of realizing herself more fully as a leader in the Indigenous food sovereignty movement. Over the past 18 years, Dawn has been generating a body of research to support decolonizing food systems in community, regional, national, and international networks, where she has become internationally recognized as a published author on this topic. Dawn's work on the third eye seeing methodology is focused on creating ethical spaces of engagement that serves to balance the cross-cultural burden carried by Indigenous peoples in the interface where Indigenous food sovereignty meets coloniality, climate change, and the corporate control of food systems. Welcome, Dawn. Eli Enns. Eli Enns is an internationally recognized expert in biocultural conservation. From Tlaoquiit Nation on his father's side and of Dutch Mennonite heritage on his mother's side, Eli promotes holistic solutions for community and ecosystem health and well-being. With a background in political science, Eli is a nation builder with values and approaches rooted in Indigenous economic theory and practice and ethical space. In 2017, a decade after co-founding the Ha'ukman Tribal Park in his own territory, Eli co-chaired the Indigenous Circle of Experts for the Pathway to Canada Target 1, which for those of you from the United States is equivalent to Aichi Target 11. This culminated in the groundbreaking 2018 report, We Rise Together, achieving Pathway to Canada Target 1 through the creation of Indigenous protected and conserved areas in the spirit and practice of reconciliation. IPCAs are now a central component of Canada's conservation efforts. Eli supports Indigenous nations across Canada to advance their nation-building efforts via his roles as co-founder and CEO of the Isako Lam Foundation and via the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership. Eli is most proud of his roles as father and grandfather. Eli Enns. All right, I'm going to join you over here and sit down. And I think there's still a microphone. Okay, so this is where we get to the fun part. I get to stop talking. So I'd love to have our panelists introduce themselves, add anything more to the very formal bios that I've shared, and to start by answering the question, what does Indigenous-led conservation mean to you? Let's start there.
Kliko, I'm going to speak a little bit in my language. Why kashith nas atlapi hatwayeth, tlakwanis sutith hatwayeth, katsien klimachsti, ha'akwapin hatwayeth, chamapith apin, kleko musquium, tsewatu squamish nisma e, uklasir sicha. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. To me, coming from Tlaoquiit, New Peoples, I reflect on our histories as a people and how our teachings talk about our connections to spirituality and the land. Hishuk et Sawak, everything is connected, everything is one. And our people still have the ability to, in our language, to communicate with other species. And throughout our history, We survived great floods by communicating to animals. We survived climate changes, and that was through the teachings of being spiritual and connected to the land and to the resources. If we take care of the land, we were told that the land will take care of us, and it's reflected in our potlatch system that the Canadian governments had tried to outlaw and outlaw our language, our relationship to the land, to resources. Our potlatch system is where all spiritual, economic, social, political business takes place, and it's a reflection of everything that is connected and everything is one. So in moving forward as Indigenous peoples, we need to understand our history in order to understand where we're at today and where we need to go. So, Chu.
Thank you for those opening words. Don, anything to add to your intro and on that question, what simply does Indigenous-led conservation mean to you?
Okay. It's working? Okay, great. Yeah, Cook's Jam, Monica for the introduction and for organizing us today to come and share some words and be in this great space with all these amazing people. As a member of the Secwepemc Nation, the translation of our name, our identity, is intimately intertwined with the water. And so our name actually translates to the people of the land where the water spills from the highest mountains. So my ancestors on my Secwepemc side have taken care of some of what used to be some of the largest spawning grounds in the world. And conservation to me means going back to those original instructions of where Coyote, or the creator, I should say, placed us in Secwepemc, the land of the Secwepemc, to take care and to live in right relationship. We were given original instructions to do that. And so conservation to me is very much about that. Just like the salmon, who come home to spawn and to be born in our territory, and then they swim 3,000-4,000 miles out to the ocean and back. They do that because of their following their original instructions. They're very highly intelligent, one of the most intelligent species on the planet that are able to do that. And so our work on conservation is very much following their cues and looking to them, knowing how much of a keystone species they are, both for our culture and our food sovereignty, as well as for all of the ecosystems downstream. In this, basically all Indigenous people in so-called BC are salmon peoples within different river systems, but they play a hugely significant role in both the creation of and the maintenance of the huge amount of biodiversity that we have here in this part of the world. So yeah, I think the original instructions and the following that and what the old one has given us and set out for our path. So I know that there's more questions to come, so I'll leave it at that for now. Cook's Jam.
Kleko. Thank you, Don. Eli.
Thought you were gonna go for a bit longer there, Don. I started filling up my water glass. Lovely to hear more from both of you, and thank you, Monica, for the fine job you did there with introductions. I'll share a little prayer I learned, a little poem. On my mom's side of my family, we're from the prairies, And my elder children and my grandchildren are connected to Sioux Valley Dakota Nation, and I met an elder there who explained to me some of the original verses of this prayer came from the Sundance ceremony, which, like the potlatch, had been banned for many years. Ekche Wichasha is about humbling oneself to recognize that without sleep, without water, without food, very quickly my life is coming to an end. And it's recognizing that human beings are not the most top of the food chain. Actually, we're more dependent than anything else in creation. Even the crow has its feathers and the deer has its hide, whereas we human beings are born naked and vulnerable in this world. We depend upon other species for every aspect of our housing, our clothing, our food, whatnot, medicines, etc. So it's that first verse of that old prayer is about recognizing our place in the world in that way. Tushina Wakan is I wear the mystery of the universe like a garment. And that is about recognizing that there's limitations to my perception. Even in the circle of humanity, we've all been given different gifts from Creator to interpret the universe, and so has the frog and the eagle and the wolf and the bear and such, the fish. They're all perceiving the universe through their unique perspective. And rather than cutting the frog up into little pieces to figure out how that frog works, what we should do is we should observe the frog and how the frog interacts with the universe. And through empathy and compassion, we can learn vicariously about the universe through the frog's behavior. And the last verse that elder taught me was Wopi Da Wia, which is a great sense of gratitude for the sun daughter, the daughter of the sun, which is the earth, Mother Earth, and the woman, which is the gateway between heaven and earth, and our ancestors from the past, bringing our ancestors back to the current day. So this little prayer stayed with me over the years, and maintaining humility in the family of creation that we share this world with. And this is a little example of the sort of philosophical and, as my brother Terry said there, the spiritual intelligence of these elder societies, which give rise to a fundamentally different approach to conservation. So the question, what is Indigenous-led conservation from my perspective is, I guess, one helpful thing is to distinguish what it's not. Conventional, protected, and conserved areas kind of fence off nature over here. This is where we're going to be nice to nature. It's kind of a voyeuristic go and nature bathing, whatnot, or recreation, visitor experience. And then on the other side of the mountain is the sacrifice area, where industry leaves thousands of years of damage. We've heard about the lawsuit here in British Columbia. The provincial government has launched a lawsuit against chemical manufacturing companies who have been producing forever chemicals. So the impact in our waterways. Anyways, I'll go down a rabbit hole real quick on that one. But yeah, the conventional approach is here we're going to be nice to nature, there we're going to sacrifice for industry. Whereas, like my brother said in our Nuchanoth language, he shuk ish tsawak, everything is one and everything is interconnected. So an indigenous approach doesn't silo out land for nature and land for humanity to use and abuse. We look at the whole interconnected thing. And it is a middle ground, I would say. There's extremists, there's extreme environmental perspectives, and there's extreme industrial perspectives. Our path of Indigenous-led conservation is the middle road, where we look at cultivating abundance in biological diversity through also maintaining healthy relationship with those very things the very lands and waters that we wish to conserve and protect, which does include, hunting and utilizing the resources. In fact, that's necessary. Otherwise, we start to forget about each other as species, and those relationships break down. So that's my off-the-top response there.
Thank you, Eli. You talked just now about how vulnerable we are as a human species when we're born, and how interesting it is that that balance really tips, right? And that a conventional view of a lot of things, of a lot of systems, puts humans at the top, controlling the rest. And you ended with a note on relationships and the importance of relationality with other species. And Dawn, so much of your work is exploring that and exploring, power balances and imbalances. And I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about how that plays out in your world.
Yeah, that's a big, wicked question, as they would say, or coyote question. I think when in relation, building on what Eli has just shared and thinking about Indigenous, our Indigenous peoples, especially role in conservation, and thinking about the impacts that coloniality has had on land management systems, land tenure systems, land governance, and thinking about even the philosophy of restoration and conservation itself. There is this system of dominion over nature, the Cartesian worldview, where nature is thought of as a machine, or everything is thought about in terms of productionism or resource extraction. And so the structural barriers to conservation and thinking about how as Indigenous peoples we can lead conservation in the system at large is a big challenge, because of the ways that the Western science-based resource management system dominates and controls, makes decisions, has this whole techno-bureaucracy established in order to maintain status quo. And we know that we're up against some pretty big challenges with, like, the financialization of all of the land, nature, housing, even food itself is increasingly being financialized, making it unaffordable for many, many people around the world. And so when we think about power imbalances and dynamics, relational dynamics between all of the actors in the land and food system in the world today, in the global food system that really we are all a part of. If we buy our food from the grocery store, even if we don't, we're still, as subsistence, like Indigenous hunters, fishers, and gatherers, very much affected by all the foreign investments and the fragmentation of our biocultural heritage areas that are really, the places where we have enhanced biodiversity through these relationships with the plants and the animals and one another. It's through the direct participation in our land and food system that we enhance biodiversity. Our food sovereignty is an integrated conservation method through the strategies and techniques that we apply through harvesting and cultivating on a very broad ecological corridor within our territories. So the power imbalances, when we think of even the day-to-day going out, thinking of the grassroots, I'm a berry picker, going out onto the land and thinking of the decisions that are being made on the land without my involvement or my community's involvement. It's very, very hard to influence change right now with all of the many factors that are affecting our agency and our own power to be out there and harvest the way we've always done, and conserve and take care of and be in relationship with. There's many, many more, many more, I mean, even within research institutions, the power imbalances when we do research or advocacy. We can think of the imbalances even within lobby groups when we look at how many corporate lobbyists there are to influence policy change versus Indigenous lobbyists. So again, we could probably look at almost any angle and find an imbalance, and yet here we persist because we know that our natural law that Eli and Terry speak about so eloquently, and many other Indigenous knowledge holders, that, you know, that's the real power. I think anything else is control, really, and which maybe I would say is falsely named as power, but really it's about control. And so, yeah, I think not wanting to come from a complete deficit, because I think it is powerful that we're still here, and we're still, we're learning to rest in the intergenerational fatigue of the genocide and the you know, the systemic injustices that our people have dealt with since colonization. And I think it's without our land, we are not the people that Creator placed us here to be. So there's a lot of work to do, but it's really beautiful to be in this space and be in the power of Eli and Terry and many others doing this work. So yeah, talking about power imbalances, I want to try and always end in a space of abundance and appreciating that. Yes. So thank you.
Thank you. You've said so much that can be unpacked and talked about for so long, and I want to invite either Terry or Eli to just jump in and reflect on anything you've said and build upon that.
Sure, thank you. As New Channel Peoples, we're moving in a direction of how do we implement traditional laws into a modern context. And we've tried to work with provincial and federal governments, and unfortunately that hasn't reached much success over the years. In fishing, we're currently going through a court process with the right to manage fisheries and sell fish commercially. And as New Channel Peoples, we always have a teaching to give, and even my grandmother's time, during a potlatch, there was a man who wasn't sharing his fish. And this poor guy was hanging by his thumbs for 2 weeks because he never shared his fish. And as a little girl, she was scolding him. You see, this is what happens when you don't share your fish. So when we're looking at management plans, we're thinking always for our people. We're thinking about our teachings when it comes to things like natural resources and logging. You know, it's been said that, excuse me, we've been fighting with the government for 40 years now with our Mears Island Declaration, and it's something that we're just entering into a discussion with the province. You know, the idea of having a tree farm license tenure and a First Nation logging company, you know, does sound very attractive. That there's going to be some economic needs that are going to be taken care of. But again, our world views clash with the province because we we don't view it as a tree farm license, and it's something that our generation has inherited and seen the problems when the government is forcing us to cut in areas where we don't want to cut. That doesn't work for our people. Even though our people have always utilized Western red cedar on the coast for our clothes, for our canoes, for our longhouses, we're always utilizing, but it's something that we're taught that we only take what we need, and we're always thinking about the future generations, and it's getting harder and harder to practice our culture when it comes to old growth Western red cedar, because the logging companies have been taken so much that you think about all of the canoe journeys, you think about all the longhouses, the totem poles. You know, what is our culture going to look like in 50 years if they're all gone here on the coast? So as Tlaokuit, we're looking at, and it's not, we're told it's not a land use program, a plan, it's a land relationship, how we interact with the land and the natural resources. And some of the ideas that we're coming up with our elders is areas where we just leave it as it is, kwasin hap. Leave it for the animal kingdom. Leave it for our people to practice spirituality in remote areas. And we also have areas where understanding that, you know, our people need employment, our people need revenues generated for social programs, healing programs from colonization, and looking at, in our tribal parks model, areas where we call Uyuth Laknish, to restore the lands with human input as well. So we're looking at things like green energy. We have run-of-the-river projects. We're thinking recreational. And this stems from the Mears Island Declaration 40 years ago. It was to protect the old growth, to protect the shorelines, but also looking at recreational opportunities, because our elders and chiefs at that time seen the need to create allies amongst folks, to that they would come to the West Coast and see the beauty of it, and want to participate and want to be part of our fight. So, thank you.
Eli.
Cool. Hello. So today, from 5 to 7, we're doing the Mears 40? Correct. So we'll get into more details about the 40th anniversary. There was all kinds of people that came together around that movement. There's a bit of a fallacy that it was just hippies and Indians on the blockades. But there was labor unions, there was church organizations, there was all kinds of different elements of Canadian society and beyond Canada that came together and just saw the injustice of what was happening to the ancient cedar rainforests. So that's, where is that? From 5 to 7 here?
Where is that, Bernie? 5 to 7 here? There's a big reception, a celebration. Yes, excellent. People who have read the program. It's here. Come back at 5 o'clock. We'll be talking and celebrating. Yeah.
But I love the term, I love intergenerational fatigue. That's a good one. I feel that. My father didn't make it far. He died young, and he suffered greatly from the residential school syndrome, whatnot. I'm moving the ball a little bit further down the field, and then the kids, and the grandkids. So we're getting, every generation getting stronger and healthier and whatnot. But I want to ask a question to the crowd, because I know this is a North American conference, and this is bang on with conservation. Who here considers himself to be a Canadian? By show of hands. Canadians? Okay, lots of Canadians in the house. Who here knows what the word Canada means? Put your hand up if you know what the word Canada means. Okay, what does the word Canada mean? Hey, village. Do you know whose language that is? Mohawk, yeah. The Haudenosaunee, they call themselves the Haudenosaunee. Mohawks are one of the Haudenosaunee peoples. And this is important to what Indigenous-led conservation is, because once upon a time, this country was absolutely overflowing with abundance. The elders talk about when the geese were migrating in the prairies, it blackened the sky from horizon to horizon, and the deafening sound of their call, their cry. The bison, of course, just innumerable, just unimaginable wealth and abundance. Apparently, at one point, it was there was more bison in the great Central Plains of North America than wildebeest in Africa. And then, of course, the salmon. The salmon, you could walk across the river on the backs of the fish, and that was just in my dad's generation, the abundance that once was. And so when the Haudenosaunee Confederation allied with King George III in the 7 Years' War, and then again in the War of 1812, they drew upon their treaty relationships. They had the Great Law of Peace, and through that Great Law of Peace, they amassed many treaty allies. And so when they went to war, everyone went to war. And I don't wish to glorify war, but the important point here is that Indigenous nations have been protecting this country from the very beginning. Our ancestors on the West Coast, we were involved in a 20-year open conflict with the United States of America from 1792 to 1811. We took the Boston and the Tonquin, and they burned down our village of Opitsat, ancient Cedar village. And that was leading up to the War of 1812. And so my grandfather went in World War II. We brought out regalia with the Department of National Defense when Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese to set up anti-landing craft embattlements along the west coast of Vancouver Island, bomb bunkers and gunnery embattlements. And so we've been protecting this country for a very long time. I want to say that because there's a misnomer out there, a fallacy that Indigenous peoples are just welfare, dependent on the states. Our relationship to our traditional economies was interfered with, obviously in a big way. But we are still trying to, make Canada a strong and resilient country, not just for our grandchildren, but for everyone's collective grandchildren. And so the punchline here and how this relates back to Indigenous-led conservation is that because we never would have had tribal parks. We never would have had Indigenous protected and conserved areas 500 years ago. If you went to the elders and said, "We want to make that island a tribal park," they probably would have thought you'd lost your mind. Because he shook ish sawak. Everything is one and everything is interconnected. So we're not going to take one part of our territory and say that's special and the rest is not, as special. So in that way, tribal parks or IPCAs is an olive branch. It is an olive branch to the dominant self-destructive society. And I think the healing is in our shared humanity. Uncle Levi Martin, he taught me a really cool concept of humanity, and Ron Martin as well. In our language, kuas means real live human being, and we're all kuas in that regard. And we all come from elder societies that had these more intelligent understandings of relationship, and it's just that some of us are disconnected from our elder societies and our these ancestral knowledge systems, and some of us still are closer to it and have remaining some parts of that. So, you know, whenever I'm talking with non-Indigenous, like environmental conservation organizations, my first advice is to get to know who you are as human beings, and your elder societies. Because unless you came on a spaceship from Mars or Venus, we're all indigenous to this planet, and we're all connected to some part of it, going back thousands and thousands of years. And so getting in touch with those knowledge systems of our collective ancestors in the past, I think is what an IPCA offers. It's an opportunity to rediscover our origin stories and to make Canada great again.
I think our North American neighbors to the south can appreciate that.
Thanks in one day.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Eli, and thank you to each of you for what you've shared thus far. I'll kind of build upon the idea of traditional economies and IPCAs not as another fines and fences paradigm that is just led by Indigenous peoples, but as a holistic nation-building vehicle that has many different components and looks at different elements of life. And we've brought Dawn Morrison here to help us think a little bit more about the world that she's bringing forward and highlighting, which is food and how food, what is the role of food? Why are we talking about food when we talk about conservation? I think we need to go there a little bit.
Okay. So food, in my journey and in the community, my Nisconluth, Adams Lake, Squilax community or family network, extended family network that I come from, food has been a very powerful point of entry into my personal healing, but also a network of people around me that helped me, I guess, or who have committed to reconciling within ourselves. So we know that truth and reconciliation has been proclaimed by many levels of government and different organizations, and that's really important. However, for the healing that's so deeply needed, the trauma associated with the disconnection from our land, our ways of life, you know, the loss of our children and the breakdown of our traditional social structures has really caused a lot of harm. So when we think of truth and reconciliation, we've come to understand that there was nothing really to reconcile with. There wasn't really a conciliatory relationship with Canada to begin with. And so really it's about reconciling within ourselves, within our own communities and families, and our relationship to the land. And I think the Indigenous-led conservation is an important, really, as building on what Eli has said, that is really an important means of truth and reconciliation. But food as a powerful point of entry into healing is what brought me home to my people in the year 2000. Prior to that, my family had been displaced. My mother and my aunties and uncles and my grandmothers were all in residential school. And when my mother got out of residential school, and 2 years later I was born. So I was born pretty much fresh into the memory of that generational trauma. And so for me, you know, many of our people struggled, go to the cities, end up, you know, we've heard a lot about the problems, the social problems. For me, it was addictions, poor mental health, just all kinds of problems around housing and, you know, living that lifestyle for many, many years, different forms of sexual, physical violence that happens to a lot of Indigenous women. And so the fact that I'm still here is quite an amazing feat, because I came home to my people and found myself. I found my sense of purpose and belonging in the food. And I remember my late Auntie Flora, when she learned I had moved home, she was the first one to come and welcome me and say it, you know, her words were, "You can call me Auntie." And that, well, I'll never forget that. Like, that was just so important socially. But she was also a language teacher, and she took me to the mountains along with my Auntie Irene and my Uncle Wolverine and Janice Billy and all these amazing elders who had, you know, fought for many years for our rights, upholding a long political legacy of activism, the late Arthur Emanuel, and really amazing leaders. And so they took me to the mountains and showed me which medicines will help clean me out, because I was detoxing, and powerful medicines. They taught me where the berries, the huckleberries are, and brought me to the river and showed me how to to catch a fish and cut it and can it and take care of myself and my daughter. And so that was really, our land-based wellness is coming from that foundation is really the most important aspect of it. And I think as individuals and as families, as communities, it's also important for like the economic piece, the poverty. And we know that 3 to 4 Indigenous peoples in Canada experience 3 to 4 times the national average of food insecurity. And we know that that's really closely connected to all of the social determinants of health. And so lack of affordable housing, and people on social assistance can't afford to buy food after they pay rent, and other forms of like Western-based education to compete in this economy, the larger capitalist economy, and many others which I won't get into now. But food is, and our subsistence, hunting, fishing, farming, and gathering, is the oldest living economy on this planet. For 90% of the time humans have existed, subsistence economies have thrived. And so learning to live with less, giving, sharing, trading, cooperating, that still happens in our community. It's just at a scale that isn't really sustainable for us. Like we living in this colonial reality, we need money too, and that's very clear in the gaps of poverty and things that we're really problems that we're seeing. So, but when we look at the wisdom of the trauma that has kind of separated us and broke down our economy and our culture, we find some really important solutions, I think, to the world's problems. And so subsistence, as the gaps in disparity are growing for many people now, it's not just Indigenous peoples now, that due to the financialization of everything, we could say, I think it's really important to look at what would a economy with mixed strategies look like, and what would an economy look like that builds on the wisdom of Indigenous peoples who have managed for the transformation of energy rather than production. And so that is like a goal, I think, for us to figure out. And that's powerful. Like, I know in many of our Indigenous languages, we have a word for life energy. We have subsistence protocols that can teach us how to manage that way. And it's really, it's been really amazing for me in the networks that I've had the huge privilege to learn and to facilitate, and where people have entrusted that kind of knowledge, and it's a very powerful movement that's happening with that. I know that's a big vision, but I think with climate change being what it is, I think it's testing us even more to look at linking food sovereignty to energy planning, and looking at Indigenous wisdom in the leadership role. And I think IPCAs are an important piece, a really critically important piece of that, and especially at the interface of food and putting food sovereignty. We know that there would be no transformation of energy. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say no, but that food is the basis of any economy, and that humans are a part of. Well, I would say whether we're a part of it or not, but that's just kind of inconceivable to me. I think we were placed here by Creator to come to learn that, and to embrace the challenges, and especially the contradictions, the wicked systemic problems around that, because we know that the capitalist economy is pretty huge, and so how do we navigate that together? But yeah, that's all I'll say for that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, traditional foods are extremely important for Indigenous peoples, for Nuu-chah-nulth peoples in particular, when it comes to any business to take place, whether it's seeking advice, a dispute resolution, just coming together for future plans. Our people are always taught to feed the people first. And the preparation of food is so important as well. It would be the men who would do the hunting. It would be the men who do the serving of food, because they didn't want death on the hands of young women who were to have babies. So it was a man's job when it came to prepping the food and serving the food, and when it came to educating, our education system revolved around haihopa and still does today. When we eat, stories are told, teachings, and it's well known that when we eat food, it goes into our system, as well as the teachings become a part of us. And we're never to be angry when we're prepping the food, or when we're eating, because of the nerves in our stomach and have a negative reaction. That's science, right? We, East Suckalum Foundation, we were part of and continue to be part of a Indigenous-led West Coast Stewardship Corridor, working with nations along the coast, and trying to figure out corridors for wildlife to travel, because a lot of the times Indigenous nations since colonization have really worked just within their own boundaries, because of the Indian Act, because of different processes that our people have been involved in. So this process of working together has and gathering people together along the coast has brought about discussions about the importance of traditional foods. In order to have traditional foods plentiful, you need to have a healthy ecosystem. So our elders and young people and leadership is following is starting to talk about the importance of shared responsibilities. When salmon leave our territory, when elk leave our territory, they need places to go that are beyond human borders, beyond traditional nation borders. So it's been a really exciting time on the coast, and working with other nations. And this year we're having another, we call it estuary to old growth. And traditional foods is at the forefront, as well as restoration. We need to restore these broken lands that have been impacted from industry. And talking about reconciliation, Canada needs to reconcile with the land, with these broken lands, because colonization didn't just happen with us as Indigenous peoples, it also happened to these lands. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sija.
Yeah, building on that, there was a Dene elder, and by the way, Dene, as I'm told, it means human being or the real people. Anyways, Indigenous folks from northern Canada, and they are connected also to tribes in the U.S. historically, apparently, I've been told. But there was a Dene elder who said it's not us Dene people that need to be decolonized. He said what the colonial governments attempted but failed to do to us, they were successful in doing to their own people. He said they attempted to erase our history and our relationship to our lands and waters. They attempted to take our language and culture away from us. And they did do a lot of damage in that attempt, but they were not successful, whereas most folks that you meet in the South don't know who they are and have never been to the lands where their ancestors came from and have that sense of continuity in language, culture, and place. So yeah, decolonization. And I can relate to that on my mom's side of my family. Monica mentioned Dutch Mennonite ancestry on my mom's side. So half my family is like blonde hair, blue eyes, and half my family looks like me. They spoke Low German, and I remember when my grandfather was passing on, he was speaking his language with the staff at the hospital in Manitoba there with his wife, my granny Carol. But we never grew up with that language at all. And it was because they made an intentional decision not to pass on that language to their children, my mother, my auntie, and my uncle. So yeah, and because they didn't want them speaking English with an accent, basically, and the discrimination that foreign children would have by others. Anyways, back to food, and building again on something Terry said there about how hahopa and hauk in our language are interconnected. So hauk is to feast on food. Hahopa is the feast of knowledge, the feast of ideas. And so the Isak Olam Foundation manages the Clayoquot campus in Tofino, British Columbia on the west coast of Vancouver Island as part of the Pacific IPCA Innovation Center, Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas. Anyways, the cafe there, we have a lodge that we're going to be renovating, so you should have your staff retreats there or something. But we also have 10 acres of beautiful gardens and natural, like old growth rainforest with trails going down to the mud flats. And from there you can see Wanajah Silthuis, that we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Mears Island Tribal Park. But going back to food again, the name of the cafe there, the renamed cafe is Chukwa Hauk. And this comes from my late great-grandfather used to go and knock on the door of Nucmius and his son, Joe Martin, who's my uncle, and Joe's still alive and passing on teachings. And Joe described that when he was a little boy, Nawasam, my late great-grandfather, would come to the door and knock, and he'd say, Chukwa Hauk. And Chukwa means come, Hauk is to feast. And so Joe and his mother and father would go to Nawas's house and Nawas would have a big pot of soup that he had been preparing, and then he would feed them, and then he would hahopa, he would pass on knowledge, teachings about our roles and responsibilities as human beings, but also our role, his Nucmius's roles and responsibilities as one of our Hatwith, our hereditary chiefs or hereditary leaders. So the cafe at the gardens, the Claquat campus in Tofino is now, we're renaming it Chukwa Ha'uk, and this will have like a youth and an elder, and we'll welcome people from different, wherever they come from, to share a meal together and pass on those teachings. And we have a totem, I feel like a commercial all of a sudden. We have a totem pole that we just stood up, but anyways, that's where we'll go out and pass on the teachings there, and there's a nice fire pit by there. Does this sound nice evening? But this is an example of an innovation center campus where we're supporting the creation of IPCAs. Dawn and her group came out there. We're going to now go visit their place. And so you have your IPCAs, Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, but we're also fostering a network of innovation centers across Canada and throughout the Pacific region. And these teachings will, instruct how we host people there. Anyways, back to you, Monica.
I'll build on that. Okay. So the report that is the foundational report on Indigenous protected and conserved areas. It has a very long title, but the first part is We Rise Together. And it's about the importance of collaboration and working across sectors, cultures, et cetera, to support Indigenous-led conservation. And there was a process, and that might be something that we highlight more this evening with more time to talk about, the rise of Indigenous protected and conserved areas and why that model needed to exist and what it was inspired by. But I want to shift a little bit into so Dawn mentioned truth and reconciliation. We really can't get to reconciliation until we've had, moments of truth telling. And that's why that word is so important in that phrase. And so we've been kind of delving into the theoretical here and providing a sense of context and background, glimpses of it, as to what is informing Indigenous-led conservation in the mind of these three people who can't speak on behalf of all Indigenous peoples in Canada. But it gives a sense of we're hoping to open a filter in the brain, a new folder system to think, and a folder system that actually has a hole through it to all the other folders, because what we're trying to illustrate is that all of these things, all of these ideas are interconnected. And here we are at the North American Congress for Conservation Biology, a kind of a focused group of people who have an interest in a specific topic, who some of you may be wondering, and actually know you are, what's my role in all of this? How do I support positive change? There were a few survey questions that came through, and so I want to share those with our panelists. They didn't get a glimpse of these, so that we know that we are speaking to some of your concerns and questions. And so how can conservation biologists, specifically, the people who we have here in this room, be allies and support Indigenous-led conservation? And what advice do you have for them? So what might they start doing? What might they stop doing? That kind of a thing. Terry?
Thank you. I was involved with a SHRC application entitled FishWix, which is Western Indigenous Knowledge Systems. So it was coming together of PhD students, master's students, and our elders. And we looked at resources on the West Coast, in particular Tlaoquiat, and because our people have never always experienced things like impacts from clear cuts, from fish farms, we needed that scientific understanding of what is happening to the environment. So many times we get these deferrals about, okay, now we have to learn about mining impacts. Now we have to learn about all of these negative impacts to the environment. So the the program was really really awesome to be a part of because we had told the students who a lot of times students want to come into our territories and do research, and we had told them that well, we want to create living documents. We want to be able to. We don't want you to just to come in and do research and then leave. We need you to help us in our struggles when it comes to what is happening to the environment from a scientific experience, from a scientific lens. And universities are really looking towards Indigenous knowledge systems as a new discipline. And we've reached out to universities to help us in when it comes to resource management, as well as having our elders at a level of PhD level, because our Indigenous intelligence can help in a lot of resource issues that that are happening today. So with relationships like the Western and Indigenous knowledge systems coming together, I think biologists can be a part of that and be part of helping in moving forward. So.
Thank you. Dawn, what is your thought on this?
Well, there's probably, well, there's some, I think, some practical things, practical approaches and some systemic issues that I think biologists can assist with kind of dismantling some of the structural, I guess, barriers within research institutions and policy frameworks for Western science-based resource management systems that often require like a linear kind of logic model to prove or find the evidence that a certain, whether it's a species or, well, I guess biology is more species specific. And I guess for ecosystems and ecology, just thinking about, I guess, transcending beyond a siloed approach and validating Indigenous knowledge systems that often are not as reductionist, I guess, is the way that biology or biologists would study. And there's a role for that, and I'm not trying to make that invalid. I think it's just more about how can Indigenous knowledge and a participatory kind of action-oriented approach to finding solutions to the loss of many, many species right now. It's at unprecedented rates. It's more about method and approach to thinking, I guess, more holistically, whether it's through like integrated kind of assessment of species, or and assessing through more of a cultural and spiritual, like the risks of that Indigenous peoples that we often are, our knowledge holders speak of when we talk about a species. But I guess methodology, like I know with the two-eyed seeing, building on that concept, but also going deeper into the Indigenous third eye seeing, which is really about the natural intelligence that we as Indigenous peoples have been, that is encoded within our knowledge systems, and how that's very much connected in a complex system that a reductionist mindset can only I guess, validate a piece of that because it is reductionist. So I guess it's just a wicked problem that I invite biologists to be in that space, to create some ethical spaces of engagement, and through the third eye seeing methodology, just kind of putting a little what do you call it, promotion of the methodology that myself that I've developed based on learning from many Indigenous scholars over the years about how we need to go deeper into Indigenous knowledge, because the two-eyed seeing is important. However, we're still, like, the two-eyed seeing for many who maybe don't know is like seeing the world through Indigenous knowledge and then seeing it also through Western science is important as a starting place. But what happens is, because the system in place is based on the Western science-based resource management, or that methodology, that we're still defaulting back into that. There's still the dominant framework for policy planning and governance is still Western science. So it feels a little tokenistic until we really center Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous ways of knowing. That I feel like that is the calling, to really look at that. And that involves looking at control, like the controlled experiment. We know that climate change and the loss of species is not under, we can control ourselves as human beings. I think that's what our challenge is. But really nature and the natural systems, working with them rather than controlling them, is really what's needed. So I think that requires a much more adaptive and flexible kind of system, and a willingness to trust in and validate Indigenous knowledge. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess kind of like what Terry was saying, and I think we're generally evolving away from this idea of extractive research. It's kind of like extracting natural resources. There's the what not to do would be this kind of the vampire research phenomenon, right? You just come in, take, and then go away. That there's a book out there by a fellow named Sean Wilson. It's called Research is Ceremony. And it's about building relationality and to have long-lasting, not just to extract, but to collaborate and co-create, and then hopefully that then has some use in the world. And I think most people would want their research to be meaningful. High impact, not in just how many times your article is referenced, but high impact in terms of doing good things in the world. And so a forum for that relationship building to kind of, because it's you go to a community and they're often not all communities, but a lot of communities are struggling with, basic necessities. There's suicide epidemics, there's water boil advisories, there's all kinds of stuff, and so a step in that direction, that's part of the design of these innovation centers. Because in an IPC innovation center, you've got nonprofits or civil society organizations, private sector, academic, educational organizations, institutions, philanthropy, government agencies, so on and so forth. So we're building them in diversity, similarly to how we wish for biological diversity in the environment. We want diversity of perspectives and skills and abilities within these innovation centers. And so plugging into an innovation center campus, I think, is a good step in that direction to not be extractive, but to be collaborative and co-creative and be good allies. in a nutshell.
All great contributions, thank you. I'll just look to you to see if there are any burning questions here before I, oh good, excellent. Which hand was up first? Right in the back? Okay, and Sude here from our team in the back there, there's a very strong arm up in there. I think it's you, yes.
Hi. Hello. My name is Rafi. Thank you so much for the session. It's been very humbling and heartwarming to hear from all of you. I'm not from North America. I'm an Indonesian PhD student at Duke. So I guess just to give a little bit of context, that I'm working a little bit with the indigenous community in the island that I'm working with in Indonesia. And last month, there's been an issue in West Papua regarding there's an industry on palm oil that is aiming to kind of like convert indigenous forest in West Papua, and then it's been going for some time, and then the indigenous community there trying to kind of like fight back regarding their rights, and they're actually traveling across the sea and the land to the national court to challenge the national government. But I think that it's not the first case, the conflict between the indigenous community and also the capitalizations of industry. And I think a lot of things regarding mining as well to fulfill the demand of like EV, battery, a lot of conflicts happening in the area that I'm working with. But I guess as an ordinary people like me, we've been, losing so much faith in our government sometimes, because cause like this, it's actually the government that actually facilitating the capitalizations and ended up winning the industry rather than the indigenous people that are actually fighting so hard to winning this. So I'm just wondering, with the experience, because I've heard a little bit on that journey, there's so much like political lobbying and very complicated things that is so hard to see a bright side to it. So I'm just wondering your journey so far, like when is that turning point happens? Because I'm sure that it's not a short journey and there's been like lots of failures, lots of sacrifices, and just a little bit like how was your community resilient in taking all of that results that is not so pleasant and bear with that kind of loss. So yeah, I guess that's probably a long answer, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question and for sharing. Eli, you have
Well,
your mic.
the hashtag from 2019 for the MERS 35 awareness building campaign was to know who you are, to believe in yourself, and to be bold for future generations. And the idea there is like when you know who you are, then there can be like integrity in your self-determination. And when you believe in yourself, and I always kind of feel like an after-school special when I'm like, yeah, believe in yourself. But really, like really believing in your own personal power and self-determination. Because once that light gets switched on, then, you can be inexorable, like water, to be like water. And I think that it was a long, you're gonna hear more about it if you come to the MERS 40 celebration or talk this evening. But it was a slow burn here because for 75 years in Canada, it was illegal to potlatch, it was illegal to Sundance, the Feast of the Dead was outlawed, and also it was illegal for an indigenous nation to hire a lawyer and pursue a land claim. So in 1951, after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, the evolution of international law took another step in 1951 at the Geneva Convention on the status of political refugees and the to protect all citizens of the world against persecution on religious grounds. And so when the Canadian diplomats returned home from Geneva following that, they looked in their own backyard and realized that the Indian Act had been doing exactly that in outlawing. And so when the Indian Act was revised in the fall of 1951, it then became possible for Indigenous peoples to begin to pursue our land claims and the injustices. But of course, it wasn't like someone waved a magic wand and now all of a sudden you've got a bunch. You have to raise money, hire lawyers, pursue. So it wasn't until, you know, in different communities are at different levels of advancement on this one. But until the 70s, really, when court cases were being brought to bear, and of course, because Indigenous law is bound up with constitutional law, our peoples were winning in courts. It's very different. I don't know what it's like in Indonesia. I'm not an expert in that situation. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is sort of like an awareness of self and a belief in oneself, and recognizing that natural law overrides everything, you know, and we're all going to die one day, not to be, you know, morbid or anything, but, you know, so will our ancestors celebrate us, or will they mourn our decisions or lack of action? You know, once you get to that point, and if you're respectful, there's a healthy way and an unhealthy way to do direct action. I'm thinking of blockades here. You know, like my uncle Moses Martin, he was our elected chief councillor in 1984 when the Mears Island Tribal Park was declared. In fact, he uttered the words at Heelboom Bay in November of 1984. And he stood there with dignity and with respect, and keeping with the theme of food. In fact, Moses invited the loggers. They came in their boats, and he welcomed them. He welcomed the loggers from Macmillan Blodell, and he said, "We would like you to join us for a meal. We've been preparing a feast, you know, hahopa and hauk, right? But you have to leave your chainsaws in your boats. This is not a tree farm. This is Wana Jas Hilthuis. This is our garden. This is a tribal park." And so with those few words, Moses was attempting to establish cross-cultural literacy, because he knew that they would not understand what Wana Jas Hilthuis meant. And so he invoked this idea of the Garden of Eden, assuming that these loggers may have a Christian background. And if they did not, he used the term tribal park just to clearly put an exclamation mark on that greeting. And I half joke that if he was pressed to define what a tribal park was at that time, the definition would simply be not a tree farm. So the palm oil plantations you're talking about, that our equivalency was tree farms, where the diverse forests were cut down, and 95% of Vancouver Island was clear-cut logged for merchantable timber plantations. That's not to say it's irreversible. That's why we look out 500 years. Our planning horizon is 500 years, because we understand it's going to take time. So those are some of my thoughts regarding the situation in Indonesia.
We have about, we're going to go until 11:35 because we started at 10:05 due to the back-to-back sessions we had earlier. We might go until 11:40, but then you need a break, I'm aware. So we'll be able to take one more question here, and then I'll remind you, I see your hand, I'll remind you that we have time this whole conference to speak with you at the Friendship Lounge and would love to engage in these types of conversations. So please do come down to the exhibitor area. So I'll hand it over to you. Oh, Sude and the microphone. Thank you, Sude.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you very much. I really like to appreciate these beautiful people well connected to the nature. And yeah, this is my question. I'm wondering that, you know, with a brief introduction, the world came to know that about 5 decades ago that we need to protect the nature. And one of the best ways is that biological diversity should be beside the cultural diversity. And here we have different categories of protection all over the world. We have IUCN categories that first went through the management categories, and after that through the governance. I'm just wondering, make this very short, wondering if the government of Canada recognize the governance system. It means that do they recognize the, you know, the power of Indigenous people and local communities over the land, over the resources? As you know, this is only Indigenous people that, you know, in a way sustainable, in sustainable way can use the resources because they need the land, they need the territory, and because of that they can conserve it. I just want to know if the government of Canada, you know, not just signing the international conventions, obligations, commitment, but now at the national level, you know, give the power to the communities, to the Indigenous people or not. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Canada is trying to learn, I think. It's their understanding that as Indigenous peoples in this country, we still live under the Indian Act, which is a racist, segregated system that puts us on these little small plots of land. It is an apartheid system that has been amended over the years. But when we step outside of our small little Indian reserves, in places like Wet'suwet'en, we see the heavy-handed tactics of the RCMP. So it's, I guess what, when we're talking about IPCA, when we're talking about tribal parks, we understand that the Canadian government understands that money talks. When we're telling the different levels of government that when a nation declares an IPCA or a tribal park, it shouldn't take a 30-year negotiation process or a court decision process to define what an IPCA is. It should trigger discussions that these groups of Indigenous people want to protect a way of life and want to create alternative economies. And as Indigenous peoples, we do have solutions. So that was my quick answer.
Do you want to add to that? Okay, done.
Yeah, in addition to what Eli and Terry have said, I think the governance is the #1 core issue, and while the federal government has delegated authority to the Indian Act mandated band councils, I feel like it is a form of divide and conquer. I feel like the Roberts Rules of Order, the elected system of itself, is very divisive in communities. I understand that the funding that's given through the Indian Act, Indigenous Services Canada, to each band is a system of institutional poverty. I feel like where band councils are wanting to do the work on conservation, as opposed to just becoming corporations to do more resource extraction, which both realities exist. they're unable to do it because the amount of funding that's given to Indigenous peoples, you can't compete with the billions of dollars and thousands of paid staff that the government has in place to do what it's doing to maintain status quo. The Trans Mountain Pipeline in our territory was basically rammed down our throats. I'm using a hard metaphor because that is exactly what has happened and what is happening with the fossil fuel industry in other nations as well. And that was a decision of the federal government that doesn't make any economic sense. It's costing more money per barrel of oil than it is in any kind of profit. The world is thirsty for fossil fuels, it's very clear. That's just one example, but yes, mining, a lot of clear-cut logging, industrial agriculture, all these things are huge governance issues. I feel it's impossible to do governance and work within this system that the government has in place to respond. And I think there's a lot of really good Indigenous peoples working within that system trying hard, but it's huge. It is very imbalanced in power. And the way that funding and, all the revenue that's generated from resource extraction, I would say probably zero or very, very little of that goes to Indigenous peoples. So land back, cash back are really important. Decolonizing wealth, studying the flow of cash from unceded Indigenous territories. Restitution means cash back and land back so that we are not working under duress within a system that is actually instituted poverty and will not enable us to respond and work in and reconcile, or meet people halfway in that system. So yeah, I want to say too that that's a really big, heavy amount of energy, and I also think it's important we don't embody that, because that can block us. I think that is genocide, that is trauma. I think it's important we acknowledge that, but don't keep reliving that in our bodies, because that will block us energetically. I think we need to acknowledge it and set it beside us and have a practice of looking at that and saying, what is the wisdom? What can move us to dismantle all of this structural racism and white supremacy that favors the top 1%, who are predominantly white males and doing what they're doing in this system and doing really well with it. But governance is the number one core issue, and I think what I really find transformative as well is that the networks, the people power, that the people mobilizing, and I appreciate how many millions of people around the world are mobilizing to change things and to do things right and learn how to be in right relationship and to transform the system is really amazing, and I'm really grateful to be a part of that. And so just placing the power and validating it and recognizing it where it the real power is. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Don.
I know we're wrapping up here really quick, but I'll just say, in a way, Canada is schizophrenic. And, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde analogy, in that in some ways there's progress, like recognition of IPCAs, supporting of Indigenous protected and conserved areas formally. But at the same time, the military-style tactics that Terry talked about at Wet'suwet'en and other problematic behavior there. But I would like to end by just saying that Indigenous sovereignty was key in the peace and friendship treaties that founded this country. I mentioned earlier why does this huge country wear Haudenosaunee word as its name because of that military alliedship and economic alliedship in the early years of Confederation. And I'm channeling a little bit Dr. John Burrows from the Indigenous Law faculty at the University of Victoria, in how those early treaties were more like festivals of relationship. The modern comprehensive land claims are like divorce settlements. And so that's why I always joke about making Canada great again too, you know, like that there were long intervals of time of cross-cultural literacy where representatives of Crown governments learned to speak fluently multiple Indigenous languages and carried knew how to conduct pipe ceremony, and knew how to produce wampum belts as well, and understanding the traditions of the Haudenosaunee and other nations. Now those times are gone. We had a dark period of relationship. We're just climbing out of it now. But we're tracking progress on big timescales. I make a big deal of the 40th anniversary because we lost control over our lands and waters for 75 years, between 1909 and 1984. Now we've started regaining that control and positive decision making for grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and we're 40 years out of it. So in 35 years from now, that'll be 75 years, and I think we're going to be far ahead. And I just can't imagine, you know, in 100 years, by golly. Of course, we'll have much more oceanfront property than we do today. Marketable. Anyways, end. Thank you. Clicko, clicko.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. And Scott, if I could have power of remote again. I'll just remind you where to find us. Thank you, thank you. Here, again, tonight at 5, and then again at 7 for the Film Fest, which also has an Indigenous-led conservation theme, so we're celebrating today. And you can find us at the Friendship Lounge in a few minutes. And then again, tomorrow, this is what's happening. Take a picture, because I won't read it out loud. Thank you so much for taking the time and being with us. It's been a pleasure to have you, and of course, to be in your good company.
Monica, is this on? Can I put this one on? Sorry, unplanned. All right, real quick, I just want to thank you again, Eli, Don, Terry, Monica, and all of the staff at the East Saco Loam Foundation for helping with all of these events. Go join them downstairs, and I was just informed by our communications staff that our social media accounts are down. Thanks, Meta. And so if you want to tag things at SCB North America, thank you. Please join us downstairs and at the rest of today's events. Thank you again, guys.